subject of Jefferson on Talk of the Nation about a week or two ago, and you had mentioned that, in your opinion, Jefferson was very keen on having the United States become a player on the world stage, which I couldn't agree with you more. My question, though, is how is it that people on the isolationist right always seem to be acting as if Jefferson wasn't of that opinion? I always found that really curious.
Well, I can't. It's a very good question, except it asks me to ventriloquize the opinions of the extreme right, which I have difficulty doing. For example, they persist in believing that Jefferson was a religious believer.
He was a deist.
I'm not sure he was even a deist, but
that was always my notion.
I think he died as an atheist myself.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
Based
sure.
on...
He writes towards the end. We'll get back to your question about the isolationism in a moment, but he writes. Excuse me. When he's nearly 80, he writes letters to Adams and others saying he approaches the end with neither fear nor hope. You can't be a believer, certainly not a Christian believer, and act like that. There's no one invited to be at his deathbed, no minister of any sort. There's nothing on his headstone. All of this is carefully planned in advance. He knows what's coming. He expresses repeatedly to visitors and in his letters utter contempt for the clergy, particularly the Presbyterian, I must say, but in general. I think he's privately concluded that there's no God.
He sure uses language that suggests differently,
he certainly
as you
had
point out.
Nothing but contempt for Christianity. I mean, when Jefferson takes a razor blade to the Bible and decides to cut out all that is wicked or profane or unbelievable or absurd from it, you're left with a very short book, which the Unitarians will still give you if you ask them for a copy. It's called the Jefferson Bible. But, you can't tell this to the people who insist that the founders thought we were a Christian country. And you can't tell them anything when it comes to isolationism either. Jefferson says, in round terms, several times, that he wants the United States to be an empire of liberty. That phrase is actually meant to mean the whole of the North American continent.
So there's
it's an empire in America, but he clearly thinks that this should extend at least as far south as Cuba, and certainly to help destroy the old empires of Europe, particularly the British one.
Sorry, Doug, you had something else you wanted?
Oh, well, essentially, you just really can't argue with the Lindberghs and Joseph P. Kennedys of this world, can you? So one shouldn't even try.
Or the Pat Buchanans. No, you really can't. Or the Pat Robertsons or Jerry Falwells, because they haven't read any of this stuff. They don't have any sense
you
of
argue
history.
with those people all the time.
Well, yes, one does argue with them, but in a way, of course, I contradict myself. One does. I've just received a challenge from Jerry Falwell to go to his intelligent design conference in Lynchburg, which I'm wondering what to do about. But one also can't argue with them because they believe, like Osama bin Laden, that everything is all in one book and that's all you need. But it's not a book that any Democrat or humanist wrote. It's the allegedly revealed word of God.
I just had a thought. Falwell at one point said that the Antichrist was living among us and was Jewish, and people assumed it was Howard Stern. But you found out your mother is Jewish, so you're technically Jewish, right?
Look, I'm in the running for this, and I've already represented the devil pro bono when the Pope invited me to testify against Mother Teresa at her sainthood hearings. So why I don't get more sympathy for the devil or respect, I'll never know.
By the way, speaking of devils, you were on, of course, talking about your book on Kissinger and talking about the case against Henry Kissinger. Not long after that, David Rockefeller came on, and he had done a memoir. And I meant to tell you this just by way of passing on the anecdote. And I asked him, what about these charges against Henry Kissinger and so forth? And he, spoke very forthright, I thought, and in a way that almost seemed to me maybe disingenuous or naive, but he said, this is a man who is a great public servant, and for him to be attacked and for him to have charges brought against him is nothing short of scandalous and unconscionable. And rather than go into Chile and East Timor and so forth, I said, in effect, there may be some merit to these. Would you concede that there may be some merit to these charges, particularly with the coup of Chile and everything like that? And his response again was, this is a great public servant. We owe him an enormous debt.
Well, I think it's only by uttering mantras that you can hope to ward off the enormous mountain of evidence, only some of it assembled by me, that Henry Kissinger is a war criminal and a liar and a committer of crimes against humanity and a pseudo-intellectual and a man whose memoirs, so-called, are full of what have now been exposed to be gross falsifications. that his presence among us is a very rank offence.
But as we used to say, how do you really feel about him?
The answer to that is to say, but how can you say that about such a great man? Well, fine, I will accept that return serve if that's the best they can do.
Stephen, join us. You're on the air. Good morning.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to ask Christopher what he thinks of the status of the teaching of history in schools, both in high school and the college level these days. And I'd just like to let him know that his book on Jefferson, I just read it over the weekend. It's going to be added to my reading list in my history class that I teach out here at a community college. It's going to join the trial of Henry Kissinger as two of the outside reads that my students are required to engage in over the course of the semester.
Michael, I have to tell you, I did not plant that question, okay?
You were smiling in a way which suggests you didn't plant it. Yeah.
It was the kind of thing that makes one's day. Thank you, sir. That's very kind of you. I'll tell you what, I wasn't educated in this country. You can probably tell that I came from England in the first place, but I have had 3 children go through the school system here, and I've been appalled at the fact that history is the orphan subject here. It's often not taught at all. Very often they don't have anyone in the school who can really teach it because they weren't taught it either. And though I've never taught in this system, I have taught at college level and graduate level in several places, and I get people who the system has let down. They're not dumb either, but no one ever told them any history. And I can tell this because when I'm trying to teach them English literature, I have to do a remedial history course, because if you haven't been told whether Mark Twain was born before, say, Ernest Hemingway, if you don't really know, and many people don't, or if you've never heard of Henry Adams and his wonderful autobiography, which none of them had, I couldn't believe it, then you have to get a timeline together. Otherwise you can't do the literary canon. So what I think about the teaching of history in this country is that it would be a very good idea.
Well, Vidal said once in an interview I did with him that he couldn't understand how teachers could make history so uninteresting when history obviously should engage us and be fascinating just because of the narratives and the stories that history has to tell. And yet many teachers, unfortunately, obviously manage to do that. You're teaching canonic literature. Are you going outside the canon, by the way? Or?
Well, I say that they can have any canon they like, but you can't avoid the canonical. I mean, I think that there came a point at which American literature became a thing of itself, no longer part of the mainstream of English literature. It broke away. It begins, I think, with Twain. That's my view, anyway, that there is such a thing. Many people say there isn't such a thing as American literature. It's only a sub-branch of English. And some say there's no literary canon of any kind anyway, so why bother? And some say, well, there isn't, come to think of it, any such thing as literature or authorship. They can say all that in my class if they like, but they have to know in what order things happened and who wrote what.
And we're talking to Christopher Hitchens. And by the way, if you
then they can deconstruct it if they like.
Deconstruction, I think, has had its day. If you'd like to join us, another kind of philo-Gallic sort of phenomenon. If you'd like to join us, our toll-free number is 866-733-6786, or you can join us by email, of course, forum@kqed.org. And the relationship between Jefferson and Washington is something you write about a good deal, and it's rocky to be sure, and it's complicated in many ways.
Yes, I think Washington didn't really trust Jefferson at all. And Jefferson's admiration for Washington, which was often very ostentatious, almost sickly, was often insincere. He thought the old boy was too easily flattered, too easily got at by what he called the Anglo-mains, the people who were pro-British and secretly wanted to have Washington as a king, or to found a hereditary dynasty, or even an elective one in America. They fell out over Thomas Paine as well. I try and keep Paine weaving in and out of these pages when I can, because I regard him as the great unacknowledged founding father, the one to whom there isn't any statue in Washington, the one they don't teach you about in school, but the one who actually was the energy of the revolution and the great advocate of America beginning again without slavery. It has to be said for Jefferson, actually, that when Paine became very, very, very much out of fashion after writing The Age of Reason, his anti-religious book, was pelted and denounced up hill and down dale and dropped by a lot of people. Jefferson never did abandon him, to his great credit.
Of course, Jefferson was painted as an anarchist, as